It is Thursday, March 7th, 2024. And today, on this beautiful day here in Portland, Oregon, you are watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. Glad to have you with us today. This is our 47th show. And so many of you have been there ever since the beginning, tuned into nearly, if not every single episode. And for that, I am grateful. But whether that's you or it's your first time here, welcome to the show. If you have not already, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and so glad that you are with us today. We've got a lot of fights this weekend. Usually what I'll do is run through the Asian MMA schedule for the weekend. I think I'm going to try at least try today something a little bit different, doing a little bit less running through every single thing and kind of highlighting some bigger topics that I've kind of thought through a little bit beforehand. And if there's any really big prospects, still throwing that your way. But what I'll go ahead and do now is throw up the Asian MMA schedule for the weekend onto the screen. And then after we go through that and some topics, then I'll take your questions. So happy to have you with us. So this is from the website that shares our namesake MMA ecosystem. I've got the full Asian MMA schedule for the weekend. This Friday is a pretty big one for One Championship. They had an event last weekend, which I'll get to in a second. Actually, you know what? I'll touch on one stuff here in a second. Just want to run through a couple other things real quick. We've got this event here, CFFC 130. Not always a promotion that I cover, and actually, this city here is wrong. That is definitely on the East Coast, CFFC. But in the main event, you've got Badmatsyren Dorzhiev versus Israel Galvan for the flyweight title. Dorzhiev is the reigning flyweight champion of CFFC. And why that's significant is because the guy is Mongolian. He is 8-0 and probably the top Mongolian prospect outside of the UFC. Just a few weeks ago, that honor would have gone to Naim Jargal to Mendem Barrel, but he was signed to the UFC after his 2 Road to UFC appearances and a very long stint of silence from the UFC. But fortunately, he has been signed. Now, Dorzhiev is the guy to watch. If he wins this fight, makes his first title defense with CFFC, what's next for the guy when you're 9-0 and you're competing in the United States? Well, people talk about Contender Series. Some people talk about Road to UFC. Some people even talk about being signed outright to the UFC. I feel like fighting at the title championship level in an organization like CFFC is almost like being in Contender Series. You're fighting the best prospects in the US. So I wouldn't have a problem if he wins this, just going straight up to the UFC. I also wouldn't, I think if that doesn't happen, then absolutely, I feel like he should go on Contender Series. Why that over Road UFC? Well, I just feel like if someone is fighting in the US, fighting the best prospects that an American promotion can pull together from not only the US, but around the world, I feel like that precludes you from having to go through the 3-step process of Road to UFC. And I feel like if there is a barrier to entry, that should be Contender Series. So I feel like put him on there, although UFC would love to have a Mongolian fighter in Road UFC to pull in a lot of that Mongolian audience, try to build that up, also build him up as a star more. And a lot of people would say, why not put him on Road UFC? Let the UFC build him up a little bit more. And that's fine. I just feel that the fighting 3 more times is sometimes a little bit unnecessary. I say just get him into the UFC or get him to Contender Series and go from there. I was thinking about this fighter in this fight earlier, and one thing that I have noticed is that, because I was thinking through, okay, who are some of the other top Mongolian prospects? And there's a couple here and there, but really, Mongolian MMA has been extremely quiet the last year or so. Really not very many events. I feel like the summer was the last time I had really seen any, and maybe I'm missing them. But in my defense, I have been entering in a lot of these results for Tapology as well. So a lot of times, if there's an event that comes up on the horizon, that gets sent to me, and I put in the results. I put it as it's coming up. So there really hasn't been a whole lot going on in Mongolia in terms of events, which is not great for the development of fighters and prospects. Otherwise, they have to go and compete other places. I will say that WLF has been hosting a lot of Mongolian fighters. They, on the 22nd of March, in a couple weeks, they are going to be having another show in Zhengzhou, which is kind of advertised as like as another China versus Mongolia event. So I think a lot of those fighters have been going to places like China to compete. But overall, I think, there are organizations like MGL1. There was another one that I'm missing out on, but it seemed like there was at least a little bit more going on, and now that's gone pretty quiet. A lot of those organizations in Mongolia were headed up by gyms, kind of promoted by notable fighters or gyms. So I don't know what the story is there, if they realized they're a little bit over their heads, didn't have the money to keep putting on shows and paying fighters. Don't know what the story is there, but either way, I hope that Mongolia can get a little bit more going, because they obviously have I think they have some good bases for fighters. A lot of good wrestling, a lot of good physical attributes you see coming out of fighters from Mongolia. So, but the story with Mongolian MMA for right now, Badmatsyren Dorzhiev, and we're also waiting for the UFC debut to be announced for Naim Jargal to Mendon Barrel. I have a feeling it'll probably be at the next UFC Asia event would make the most sense. So there you have it. Update on Mongolian MMA. Let's also get back over to the calendar. And this weekend in Santa Cruz, you've got this Kyrgyz guy, Uran Salty Baldiev, fighting Bruno Assis for the interim LFA light heavyweight title. Of course, UFC 299, O'Malley versus Vera 2, one of the best events in memory for me. Really just something really to look forward to with just about every single fight. Love this event a lot. Crazy to me that they stacked back-to-back pay-per-views. That's it's a really exciting season, I think, for the UFC. I went over in a good amount of detail Song Yadong versus Pyotr Yan in my newest YouTube video, which you can check out after this video, after this podcast, if you haven't checked it out already. Kind of covered the storylines, the drama, profiles of each fighter, what to look for, potential strategies for each fighter, as well as a prediction in the video. So I really try to cover it all with Song versus Yan. Really looking forward to that fight. My overall prediction, I do think that Pyotr Yan is probably going to get a decision here, unless Song can just light the fuse right away and get to work early. I think that's the main thing to look for. How quickly can Song Yadong get started? If he can get started quickly, I may have to change that prediction. But overall, I think Pyotr Yan is going to take this fight. You've also got Asu Almabayev fighting CJ Vergara. Kazakh coming back for his second win in the UFC. Deep's got an event. This one here, Double G FC. I don't know if this event is still happening. Double G is notoriously one of the promotions that is the quietest. You may never know that there's an event until the day before. And honestly, haven't seen much from these fighters talking about it. There's a month or two ago where there was a lot of social media posts, but I have not heard much, if anything at all. So as far as I know, okay. It looks like this event is still on, folks. You know what I did is I just checked out Choi Sung-gook, who I have set in the main event fighting for the flyweight title. And on his Instagram story right now, he is cutting weight. So I'm assuming this event is still on. Have not seen anything for it. Hopefully it airs on YouTube, but your guess is as good as mine on Double GFC. Kind of an interesting Korean promotion there. And then Matrix Fight Night 14. I'll go ahead and leave the card up here, or actually, I'm gonna take it down for a second, so I can kind of focus on something else. But Matrix Fight Night 14 goes down this weekend from Noida, which is near Delhi in India. And I would say if you're to ask me, what's the biggest fight that can be made in South Asia right now? South Asia, including India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, including like Afghanistan in there. This is the fight. Sanjeet Budwar fighting Abdulazim Badakshi. Badakshi is one of the most popular fighters in all of South Asia, definitely out of Afghanistan, or at least outside the UFC. That he might be comparable to Nasrat Haqparast, but Badakshi still a super popular fighter. A strong bit of controversy in his recent past with everything that happened a few MFN shows ago, but I don't know how that was all resolved behind the scenes. Either way, not only is he back in Matrix Fight Night, but they've allowed other Afghani fighters on the card as well. There's a few other Afghani fighters on here, so perhaps they have just ramped up security, decided to take some other precautionary measures to prevent a kind of debacle like they had with the fans a few shows ago, supporting Afghan fighters. So, but this is the fight. Probably outside of this, I would say Angad Bisht versus Clinton DeCruz would be the biggest fight that you could make in South Asia. But this one, just with Sanjeet Budwar, he's defended his title a couple times, and Badakshi has been the boogeyman. I mean, he was supposed to be on road to UFC last year, didn't because of visa issues. So, he's like right at that elite level. Comes out, returns to Matrix Fight Night in last fall, and starches Park Jae-hin in like 18 seconds, KOs him with an elbow. Just the most flawless, devastating performance you could ask for. And a huge collision of styles between Sanjeet Budwar and Abdulazim Badakshi. Badakshi immediately in your face, fights hard, tries to get you to the ground, slam you to the mat, striking from every single angle, whereas Sanjeet Budwar, very methodical, fighting on the outside. And this should be a really interesting fight. And I don't really know, if you were to ask me what's next for the winner of this fight, I don't know. I mean, Budwar's biggest challenge, the best fighter that he could fight in the MFN featherweight division, is Badakshi. Not even close. He's already beat Shaya Manand twice, and now like Badakshi's it. So if he beats Badakshi, by then he'll have defended his title, 2 or 3 times. I don't know what's next for him. It seems like he would either have to fight for a different belt, maybe go up to lightweight, something like that, or leave the promotion. I don't know. I don't know what things are like for him. Perhaps they could also, MFN has been pretty good at finding fighters from around the world to bring into their organization for kind of one-off fights. So there's always that option as well. I think MFN's pretty well connected. For Badakshi, I think if he wins this fight, gosh, I think if you're MFN, you do everything in your power to keep this guy, because he is driving a lot of fans to your events, a lot of eyeballs. And, for a promotion that's trying to grow, this is a guy that you want to build your promotion off his back if he is willing to stay. But we do know UFC wants him, and road to UFC, the timing is perfect. Win on Saturday and then go in road to UFC's season 3 in May. So I think a lot riding on the line there. Both exceptional fighters. Really looking forward to that fight. Aside from that, what's interesting is you've got this Paulus Athena event this weekend. I was actually really close to going to that event. I've been pretty well connected with that promotion. Paulus Athena is a all women's promotion that is out of I should say Western Canada. And they have put on some pretty good shows. They almost are. You could see them as like the Invicta of Canada, but they're bringing in fighters from all over the place. They've got an Indian girl, Karinsky Fernandez, on the amateur side. They've got Jillian Go, who trains out of Soma Fight in Bali. She is Singaporean. She's on the card. And then the other fighter, I knew there was another one on there somewhere. Maybe just those two. Either way, solid event that they've got going on. And then let's talk about one championship for a second. So first, I want to talk about last weekend's event. They have this event in Qatar, 166. We're promised 5 title fights, and we end up getting 3. The reason that they rebooked Stamp versus Denise for June in Bangkok, I'm still not like 100% clear on why that was changed. But it is what it is. And then they lost a grappling title fight. I would say most of their biggest fights were still on the card, but Anatoly Malikin beats Rainier de Ridder, and kind of an odd stoppage, kind of a retirement-ish looking stoppage from de Ridder. Honestly, not that surprising of a result. And then Tong Kai beats Tan Lei by TKO in the second round, drops him, finishes him off with hammer fists. Great performance from Tong Kai. Honestly, I think he is one of the most slept on, underrated fighters outside the UFC, definitely in one championship. And yeah, I feel like probably Gary Tonin will be next for him. That'll be an interesting test for sure. And then the weird thing is you got these 2 back-to-back DQs. The first one, Amir Ali Akbari beating Arjun Buller, TKO in the third round. I'm not really sure what the story is. Why Buller? I mean, he's shown some timidity in previous fights before, but overall, just a really weird fight. And Herb Dean DQs him for timidity in the third round. The yellow red card. I actually really like the yellow red card system with one championship, and I think has been in some like Pride, and perhaps Ryzen uses it as well. But I do actually really like it. I like that there is a tangible warning, like if you don't have this system, it's just kind of like you get a warning and then you get in trouble. But I don't know. It's not as clear how close am I to consequences. And I like the carding system because it gives you a very clear picture of this is how close I can push it. You get a yellow card, then you get a red card. It seems like there's a little bit of inconsistency with some referees where they say, well, technically the warning was in the locker room, and then I'm going to take a point in the fight. So I like giving out the cards. The financial penalties, I think, is a big problem. I feel like those penalties should go to the opponent, because it seems a little bit sketch to me that the commission is basically like handing out a penalty that ultimately they benefit from. So I don't love that. That rubs me a little bit the wrong way. And I wish that it would just be forfeited to the opponent. But either way, Amir Ali Akbari, I feel like, he's already fought Malikin. Is that right? Ali Akbari should be next for the title if they go that way. If Malikin goes back to heavyweight, which I feel like in this situation, we're a little bit in like a Chris Cyborg or Amanda Nunes or more like an Amanda Nunes situation, where you're holding that featherweight belt, Nunes was, but you're really only coming back to defend it if there's someone there for you. And Malikin, unfortunately, he has already beat Ali Akbari by first round TKO. That was in September of 21. So if these guys end up fighting next, it would be 3 years. Meanwhile, however, Ali Akbari has won 4 straight, all of those finishes. So I feel like that fight is next. It would be an exciting fight, but I think for Malikin, unless one championship can bring anyone new in, we're kind of in the land of rematches. I guess the only space that you could have a new kind of fight is for Ongla and Song. I could see them like booking him versus Malikin for like light heavyweight next. Not necessarily a fight I want to see, but it would at least be a fresh matchup. Ongla Song, one of the longest tenured fighters on the roster. Kind of one of those guys that's always like 2-ish wins away from a title shot. So I could definitely see them doing that next. But I mean, yeah, those upper weight classes with one are just in such a weird spot, especially like middle and light heavyweight. There's just literally no one there. So I think they're in the land of we're just signing people for one-off title fights to fight in these for this belt. Otherwise, the belt's just going to sit there. But yeah, then the other DQ was Joshua Pasio beating Jared Brooks as Jared Brooks kind of suplexed him and dumped him on his head. And it was a good call. I think that was the right call. That was a very, very consequential move. If for whatever reason the fight would have continued, Pasio could have been messed up for the rest of the fight pretty bad. So I think that is the right move. However, some folks have recently pointed out the lack of consistency from one championship, or perhaps I would say refereeing and officiating to enforce that rule. I saw someone post earlier today, a few weeks ago, a fighter did the exact same move and wasn't punished. Also, I think it was Angela Lee against Xiong Jingnan did the exact same move. Fight wasn't even paused. So there's a little bit of consistency problems with the enforcement of that rule. It may just depend on which referee that you have, but either way, they've set themselves up for a trilogy fight. So strawweight with one championship, honestly, a very healthy division, in my opinion. They've had a lot of fights with that recently, and I think that division is doing just fine. But kind of, the other thing with this 166 event was the attendance. It was not great. And especially interesting considering they gave away a lot of free tickets. I saw the Google form myself, like it was very accessible. They do this often at shows. They did this with the Colorado event that eventually they filled the arena, this or that. But, very interesting. And some people have criticized One Championship for this. Chatri even said that by his visual estimation, the arena was 90% full. We have video evidence obviously proving otherwise. And, I'm actually going to bring up, see if I can bring up a video of that. But, honestly, I don't honestly read into that too much. I know one, like they didn't just like put on any old show there. They really tried to make that as big as they possibly could. At this time, I wouldn't say it was like the biggest fights that they could put on as a whole, but maybe for the timing, I think it was as big as it could be. So here we go. Let me share my screen with you. Hopefully this is muted. This is from my friend Jonathan of Kowloon and Kotai. You can kind of see there a lot of empty seats. This is in the co-main event. So there he is zooming in. A lot of empty seats, a lot of free tickets given out, and they've already blocked off a portion of the arena. You see the curtain there on the right side. So there we go. See if I can make this a little. The half full arena, and I don't know, half, little over half. The thing is, here's what you have to realize about this. Qatar has never had a major MMA event before. It's rarely had any MMA shows before. Actually, I don't really know the history of MMA in Qatar, kind of a little bit outside my niche, but anytime you go into a new country that hasn't had MMA before, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And especially if you're not the UFC, I think it's even harder. Sometimes the UFC can go to a new place like Paris, France, and sell out within an hour. Or if they, have their first show in Vancouver, Canada, boom, they don't even have to have like 3 title fights on the card. They can just by the mere fact of there's such a hunger for the UFC brand, they can sell it out right away. The Middle East has been a little bit more hit or miss. A couple weeks ago, we saw the Bellator PFL card in Saudi Arabia, and that was pretty much just an event full of rich people on their cell phones for a good part of the event. So not really any kind of crowd pop. It'll be really interesting to see the UFC event this June, if it feels the same or if it looks a little bit more like Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi, though, if you go to those events, like I recently watching a recent Petr Yan fight at one of the Abu Dhabi shows, and there was a really, like, people were wild at that event. The event was sold out, big arena, a lot of really excited fans there. So it's not so much a Middle East problem. I don't know if it's just the UFC brand, the kind of cards that they've been bringing there. I think there are a lot of people that travel to Abu Dhabi for those big shows. And the UFC's credit, they put on really good shows when they go to Abu Dhabi. They bring stars like Makhachev, Khamzat Chimaev, a lot of their big guns. But Qatar, it may just take a while for that hunger for MMA, that familiarity to build. I'm not really sure what like fan hunger is. That is the other side of when we talk about when we talk about the Middle East and how it's shifting to be a combat sports central mecca, pun intended there. But the Middle East shifting to be this hub of combat sports. The other side of it is the crowd, the fans, like how much of an audience can be commanded in Saudi Arabia, in Doha, Qatar, anywhere else they may go. We know Abu Dhabi works, but that's one thing I'll be interested in. And it honestly may take a little bit of time to grow. We've seen that with a lot of other places around the world. That depends on TV deals that have been long in place in those countries. It comes to fan education. It boils down to what kind of marketable fighters from that local area can you put on the card. You think about for China. I always go back to China because that's kind of the one I'm most familiar with. You think about China. Back in the day, they would go to Macau, putting on shows in like a sub 10,000 seat arena. I don't know if they're ever sold out. Granted, they also weren't the biggest of shows, but a couple Chinese fighters here and there on those cards, but no one that really had a big following. Eventually they make their way to like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, or Shenzhen, and those events are getting a little bit bigger. But still, people still tell me like MMA in China is still kind of a niche thing. And I know not always fair to compare China to a much smaller country like Qatar, but just goes to show like it may take a little bit of time, and it may take just the right card, just the right performance to light the match. We saw today in PFL, Cedric Doumbé versus Baki. I can't remember to pronounce his last name, but really odd fight if you haven't seen that. But we saw like that felt like it was, Stipe Miocic fighting in Cleveland, or it felt like Jorge Masvidal fighting in Miami, something like that. Or, someone that's just like perfectly tailor fit to their home. It was just this 20,000 seat arena, sold out, everyone chanting, screaming, like, but for that, it was like we have a market that is starved for MMA, can't get enough of it. And then we've got a couple stars just right for this market that people have a really strong attachment to. So I give one a little bit of a pass for that. I don't think it's anything on their part for now. I just think that, like, going forward in Qatar, are they gonna, like, what is the future of one championship in Qatar? I don't know. I mean, I think I know it's easier said than done, but like whatever kind of Middle Eastern, I mean, you kind of follow the like Khabib, Islam Makhachev model of any kind of like Muslim, religious fighter. That's like you build the card around those kind of fighters. But yeah, otherwise, and I didn't feel like they really had that. They had a couple guys lower down in the card that were from the Middle East, but not really that just like electric guy that you can put at the top of the card. So maybe they'll find it. But I give them a little bit of a pass. Let's shift to one Fight Night 20 that goes down tomorrow in Bangkok. Overall, I think there's only just 2 fights that are MMA fights on this card, but I think that they're 2 interesting fights, and I'll tell you why. At the beginning of this year, I put out a video about kind of a lot of the state of One Championship's roster. Kind of looked at each division and judged them on how much life they have, how far can they go. And for the atomweight division for the women in One Championship, really the only title fight that I felt like was there, although it wasn't like necessarily a title fight that leapt off the page to me, was Stamp Fairtex versus Denise Zamboanga. That was supposed to happen last Friday. It's now been pushed to June 167 on June 8th in Bangkok. But I think like past that, the atomweight division, so for a little while has been a little bit, exhausted. It feels like they've kind of gone through a lot of the top contenders, and it needs to rebuild. And that's why I think this one Fight Night 20 event is interesting, because there's a handful of fighters on there that I really think one could build the future of their atomweight division around. Let me share this with you. This isn't a screen that I share often, but you'll get a little bit into some of my inner workings here. So I've pulled up, this is a list of, as far as I can tell, active atomweights with One Championship. The ones that are bolded are the ones that have a fight booked. So you can see it's fairly small. These are fighters not that have just competed in one-offs with One Friday fights, but fighters that, as far as I can tell, have a long-standing contract, a multi-fight deal with One Championship. Some of them, I don't know if they're on the roster still or not, but either way, and then you can see the top 5, the rankings there. Stamp has already beaten number 1, number 3. Number 4, Tiffany Teo, has been inactive for a long time. And then even looking down there, she's beaten Ritu. And thinking about the future of the division, I mean, let's face it, the strawweight division in One Championship for women is tanked. It's toast. Xiong Jingnan, no one to fight in the division. I don't know what they're going to do with that division. They have to sign someone, or they have to bring, or someone has to move up and weight to fight her. That's the only thing they can do. She has pretty much tapped out that whole division. She's getting older. That's a whole nother story. So really, atomweight, I feel like is really their only women's division. And at the beginning of the year, I was starting to wonder, like, is there really anyone coming up? And there was a point when I would have said Kim So-yeol was that fighter. was on a win streak, was submitting a lot of girls in one championship. As far as I know, she is in a standoff with one championship. She apparently signed with the UFC. There was some stuff going on behind the scenes where no, actually she was still signed with one, but that was not clearly communicated to her, different members of her team. And so one threatened legal action. And so she had to tear up the contract with the UFC. But one championship, as far as I have heard, has basically frozen her out. Unless they change their mind, I don't know if they want her back in the organization to fight again. Really sucky situation. So I would have said that because one championship wanted to build, and this isn't my opinion, I heard this from folks, one championship wanted to build the future of the atomweight division around Kim So-yeol. They're really banking on her being in the organization. That's why they were so mad about it, about her potentially signing with the UFC. So I don't know. That's why I haven't included her on my roster. But tomorrow we've got Noelle Grandjean versus Victoria Souza, and we've got Chihiro Sawada versus Jin Radzuan. Which I will say, this video may, or this segment of the podcast may go obsolete in not too much time, because both Chihiro Sawada and Jin Radzuan, they both either missed weight or just hydration. And I do believe Radzuan missed weight by 5 pounds. I think it was Sawada that missed weight. As far as I know, and I checked just before I hopped on here, as far as I know, they have not publicly, a catchweight agreement has not been publicly announced. So I don't know if this fight is still on or not. But either way, Chihiro Sawada, I think, has kind of taken the place of Kim So-yeol as sort of the future fighter that one championship wants to build the atomweight division around, hoping that she becomes a contender. She recently spoke to one of my friends on social media, Charlie Sugoku, great guy to follow for Japanese MMA. And she told him that she had signed a multi-fight deal with one championship. So expect to see her on a lot more bigger shows from here on out. And they're expressing that faith by putting her against a ranked fighter in Jin Radzuan. So I think Sawada, she could be it. She looks great so far. I think if that fight happens, that's a very important fight. And then the other one is Victoria Souza versus Noelle Grandjean. Souza fought against Victoria Lee back in the day, was not successful. Noelle Grandjean, I feel like the verdict is still out for me on her, but it just seems like she has a couple of tools that if she puts everything together, she could be a really incredible fighter in the division. She hits really hard, really athletic fighter, exceptional judo as well. She was submitted by Kim So-yeol last year, but otherwise looks great as a prospect. And I think if she gets by Victoria Souza, she should fight someone either just outside the top of the rankings or, like a number 5 kind of ranking next. But I'm interested to see what happens with her. I think that she has a lot of tools to be a really marketable star as well, if things are successful for her. So really, you have an event here that, not a whole lot going on the MMA side, especially in terms of like consequential fights on this one Friday fight show, one Fight Night 20 show, but could be some really good prospects on there for sure. All right. As far as other Asian MMA news, there is a lot going on with Indonesia that I want to share, but it will probably take a long time. And because of that, I'm actually working on scripting a video and actually writing a whole article. I'm asking a couple sources on a few things, and I'll get to talk about that. Some of this stuff is public with like One Pride MMA schedule, at least a little more public in like the Indonesian MMA sphere. But you'll hear a lot more from me on that soon. You've got the UFC Combine taking place in Shanghai next week. Also, Ryzen veteran Yusuke Yachi, he is going to be fighting at the upcoming Bellator event in Paris on May 17th. He's going to be fighting a Road FC alum in Mansour Barnoui. Yachi, a pretty good Japanese prospect, excited for that to take place. The other thing that, I guess last week I mentioned Liang Na versus Ivana Petrovic. Other than that, things pretty quiet with Asian MMA this week. So let's get on to your questions. Can we talk about Bloody Elbow being bought out and its implication to MMA as a whole? Yes, we can. Like many people in the media, I mourn the loss of Bloody Elbow. It was one of the most essential pieces of the total MMA picture. In the one sense, like, yeah, it's a big hit, but know this, I also don't think that MMA media is in transition. Perhaps it's always in transition because audience and technology is always in transition. And so I think if I'm an optimist here, I think that all of these stories, all of what Bloody Elbow does and their writers, I think that in a little bit of time, you'll see a lot of these people launching their own platforms, perhaps getting hired at different companies. Although I don't feel like there's a whole lot of bigger MMA companies, medium companies that are having like this big budget to hire people. So I don't know if it's just going to be that they're going to get hired at like a junkie or a fighting. More likely, I would say it's going to be more of kind of what I'm doing, of like personal brands. I really hope, like, I think if I were to like give advice to some of these writers, is like really invest a lot into stuff that you own, whether that's Substack, a YouTube channel, but find ways to create a platform for yourself and continue to report on these stories, form a coalition with some of the other writers. Nate, Kid Nate, the guy that ran Bloody Elbow, that just sold it, Nate Wilcox, he has indicated that he's going to try to bring on some writers to his Substack. So I think there'll be a little bit of a period of shuffling around, but eventually you'll see a lot of these guys come back, their voices. It is unfortunate that we are a month before the UFC antitrust trial begins, but hopefully we get, a lot of these guys, and not all of them work for Bloody Elbow. Thinking about like, John Nash does, Paul Gift, Eric McGracken, but I'm hoping we get some pretty good coverage for this trial as a whole. And I think we'll get that even with or without Bloody Elbow. But yeah, I mean, if you have any more specific questions on that, feel free to ask them. But MMA media as a whole, it is suffering, it is bleeding, it is also in transition. One of the biggest issues, Nate Wilcox had said that the Google algorithm changed last fall, and after that, their ad revenue just like tanked. And so, the way that these sites survive, a little bit from sponsorships, but mostly from ad revenue. So they are wholly dependent on returning users and the Google algorithm for searches. They're dependent on people sharing articles over social media. And so, but the main thing there is that ad revenue. So it seems like, it's like, if you had to ask, like, what is the one thing that so many news sites, because it's not just MMA media, it's Vice and Vox and BuzzFeed and a lot of really big media companies that are all suffering. It's not just MMA fans, MMA thing. It's sports as a whole. So I think if I had to say what's the one thing is I would say ad revenue and ads in general is just it's being spread a lot more far and wide than it used to be. A lot of companies are putting a lot more ad revenue into social media sites like Instagram, Meta, YouTube, and TikTok, things like that. And it's not just on web pages anymore. It's a lot more in apps, things like that. So I would say that is one of there's multiple reasons why it's changing, but I also have faith. Like I have faith that like hopefully a lot of people will continue to adapt, right? A lot of media members have adapted, others not. An interview that I would point you all to and that I just listened to yesterday is between James Lynch and this YouTuber named Jesse on Fire. He brought on this YouTuber named Jesse on Fire, who I'm sure some of you would have some opinions about because they call him the king of clickbait, and you can kind of see where that's going. But it was really interesting because they talked for about an hour. And I mean, if you know James Lynch, his style is very different from Jesse from this guy. I don't know his last name. I'm just going to call him Jesse on Fire here. But and I'd be with James there. Like my style is radically different from Jesse on Fire. But I really enjoyed listening to the interview just because it really kind of got you inside the mind of a content creator that has adapted. I mean, he has one of the most successful MMA YouTube accounts at over like 151K subscribers. You look at the page and it looks very like tabloidy, a lot of like giant all caps, a lot of things centered around fighter drama, which you all have very clearly let me know how you feel about that. But I think there is something to learn there of in James and Jesse were talking about this of like, you do have to learn how to adapt. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but as a media member, you do have to learn how to adapt to changing times. And I think James is someone that has done that well. He puts out content in very high frequency, like videos or clips on YouTube in a really high frequency, really high quality things, both interviews and also opinion pieces. He's active on various social media platforms, and I think that he is doing really well, and he's like a media member that's going to do well for a while. And other media members, I would say, that don't have their own personal presence established, I would say, like, even for the big guys working at the big companies that you and I all use, like, if you haven't started like your own YouTube channel, I would do that. If you haven't started your own TikTok channel, do that. Even just to put a few things out there, even if it's, I realize if you work for MMA Junkie, you may not be able to like repost MMA Junkie things to your own personal page. But if you could even just hop on there once a week, film a live opinion piece on something, minimal editing, just do that just to get your foot in the door. Get someone to design a good logo and a good banner for your YouTube page. But yeah, I mean, this is the way it's going. I've always said that all of this same content can live on. It just needs to take a different form. Instead of writing an article, make a YouTube video. If you want to write an article to go along with it, do that. I'm going to this weekend. So probably like tomorrow, I'm going to film kind of just a broad Indonesian MMA news update. I'm going to probably have some little tidbits of breaking news or just quotes or things that I get from various sources. But I'm going to go ahead and just almost like write a script or a transcript and put it into an article as well, just to have something on both places there. But so that's how I feel about, I mean, I absolutely feel for all the staff that have lost their jobs. It is hard. It is so hard to get hired in MMA media right now. Even if you're talented, it is so hard to get hired just because there are so like the the companies are dying, and the ones that are alive are typically not growing their staff right now. So there's honestly just not a lot of room. So I hope that their career path becomes clear to them on what they want to do, start something on their own. Gosh, like you hate someone to have to like change their career when they've invested so much and done such a good job for so long, but that might be where we're at. So James, I'd like to discuss Team Alpha Male's training style. I've been asking around, and word on the MMA sphere is that Team Alpha Male relies on brute force things and not developing young talent like Macy Barber. I mean, I can't necessarily like comment a whole lot on that. Like I mean, I don't know where, not questioning you, but like, you know, I haven't like asked around on that like you have. I can definitely like look at fighters like Song Yadong. I feel like Song is one of their best shining examples of someone like Song does not strike me as a brute force fighter. Maybe Macy Barber. I mean, honestly, that was kind of what Macy Barber was at the start. And I think that she has refined things better. We're going to find out a lot more this Saturday when she fights Caitlin Seminara, formerly Caitlin Chukagian. But yeah, I would push back on that some. Are there areas that I mean, a good strength and conditioning program, absolutely necessary. And I think that they have that down. Good wrestling, totally. They're known for, you know, guillotine chokes, things like that. I think they do have some good grapplers in their house, but not to say that there aren't other areas for them to improve, but like I have never felt like Song Yadong is a brute force kind of fighter. And honestly, like, I mean, I know you all have your criticisms of Yan Xiaonan, but I wouldn't put her into that camp either. And both of those fighters have been able to get pretty far. So I don't know. There could be some imbalances. No gym is like totally even in all other things. Team Alpha Male, good on wrestling, good on strength and conditioning. Not bad on striking, but yeah, I don't know. It could be uneven. I'm not really sure on that. Is it a conflict of interest for the PI in Mexico to build teams like the Shanghai Developmental Program? How does Dean Amasinger coach, but is also part of the UFC? That is a great question. Dean Amasinger is on my list of people to interview this year. And I'm also really hoping to actually get some time over at the PI later this year to actually like go there. So, but that is a great question. I am assuming, I haven't heard anything on the Mexico PI, but if they're just following the model of Shanghai, then that would mean that Mexico eventually would hold a combine where they bring in fighters from Mexico, potentially greater Latino America, and bring them in for a combine, evaluate them, give them scholarships, and allow them to train there for a year at a time, just like Shanghai has done for the last couple of years and is doing again next week. So there are some boundaries that are put in place. I think the boundaries are that, first of all, they're not allowed to corner any fighters. And, you know, some things are a little bit vague to me. At one point I heard that they're not allowed to like really game plan, but I don't know that that's actually true because they still do. I've heard of them doing that as well. The conflict of interest would be that it looks as though the UFC is sort of like pushing for certain fighters to win, maybe giving them special opportunities. On the flip side, they have, you know, with the Shanghai PI, they have a group of fighters to which they have full access to know everything about these fighters. They know exactly how they're doing. They can evaluate them really well, where their skill is at. And so that honestly is a little bit of a strength. And also, like, I mean, I wouldn't say that they've gotten any special opportunities simply because they performed really well at Road UFC this last year, really, really well. And they continued to perform better and better. But they're not managing fighters. They're not getting them fights, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, the other thing is like, so the team, it's not how you would normally think of as like a team that fighters can just stay at forever if they want to, like a team alpha male. I think the way it works is that the only fighters that train there typically are fighters that are on a scholarship from the UFC because they've gone through the combine, and that scholarship has a limited period of time. I'm not totally sure. This would be a question to ask Dean, but if the scholarship time runs out for a fighter, do they then have access to come back in and out as long as they pay, just like a normal gym? I'm not totally sure on that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I would need to ask Dean about that. But you also have at the Vegas PI, there are fighters that will spend a lot of time there. They work with nutritionists and various, no one that's doing any help with like specifically their MMA technique, but yeah, strength and conditioning, dieting, recovery, things like that. So that's a little bit different, but I guess I'm trying to think through where the conflict of interest would be of just mere coaching, because the conflict of interest would be something like a James Krause scandal where you're incentivized to coach a fighter in a certain way for a personal or company-wide benefit. And I'm not sure if there is one that exists just by coaching. Obviously, if you have two, like there's been situations where there's been two fighters that have been a part of the system, like a Lu Kai versus Lee Kai Wen, or Lee Kai Wen versus Ija. And in that case, as far as I know, like a fighter will leave the PI and train somewhere else. But all these fighters have their own home gyms. Song Yadong is part of Umbo Fight. So is Stu Mudarji. So is Rongju. So is Ija. All these fighters come from somewhere, and they're still very closely affiliated with those gyms. And yeah, a lot of times their coaches from their home gyms do the managing and arranging of fights for them. There may be some times where the UFC kind of mediates that a little bit. Someone may reach out to the UFC with a fight opportunity and the UFC sends it over to the fighter, but I don't think the UFC is actively going out and trying to find opportunities for their fighters. That could be a little bit sketchy in my opinion, because then you could have the UFC actively finding easy fights for their fighters to basically just kind of pad their record. I think that could get a little bit shady if they were doing managing or a lot of like career advice too, because obviously like the UFC is going to push a fighter to fight with the UFC if they feel like they're ready. And so, yeah, there are definitely some boundaries that need to be put up. But as far as I know, managing and cornering are not done by the UFC. Great question, though. Also want to build on Jimmy's question. Why does Jake Shields not opt out of the antitrust lawsuit, but he's making fun of John Nash? I wonder, have you all ever gotten something in the mail that's like, hey, this company that you used to work for is in a lawsuit, and if they win, you could get some financial compensation because you bought something here, you were involved in this thing. I've gotten them before, and it's like, if you want to opt out, send them, mail this. And honestly, I've never done that because I'm like, I'll take free money if you want to send it my way. I don't see why a fighter would opt out of it, to be honest. If they're making the payment details of everyone else public, I don't know why you would want to opt out of it. If you can just sit there and get paid for it, I don't know why you would opt out of it. So I think that would be why most people did not. But yeah, it's interesting with Jake Shields. I mean, I don't know. That guy, he's another kind of a guy, but I don't know. I also haven't followed that either. I haven't seen specifically what Jake Shields has said, but he says some out there things, that's for sure. I'm a lady Muay Thai fighter. Do you think the mat one has provided an outlet for women's Muay Thai because it's not oh, interesting. So it sounds like you're asking is that one has not really built that up for women. That's something I hadn't really thought about before. I mean, you look at this card tomorrow at One Fight Night 20, and it's an all women's card. There's a lot of Muay Thai fighters on there, but I don't know. I mean, maybe you would be the better one to tell me, like, is Muay Thai for women in Thailand a exceedingly popular thing to do, like it might be for men, or do women generally stay? I know there's definitely some really good, think about Loma Lukbunmi fighters like that. Obviously, one has a few women in Muay Thai, but it definitely doesn't seem like something I hear about as much. Yeah, I think that could definitely be a part of it. Right now, they are really, really like catering to and following the Thai market right now. Everything that they feel like the Thai market would want, they're doing kind of, but with their own spin on it. So if Thailand is not producing a whole lot of high level women Muay Thai fighters, then I can see them following suit with that and not really getting into it that much. They're putting on fights every single Friday, and they want to mostly fill those out with fighters from Thailand that they feel like they can sell a good crowd every Friday. So that's probably what I would think, but I also don't really know a whole lot about what women's Muay Thai looks like in Thailand at the moment. So maybe you would know more about that. I've heard that Shanghai PI is pretty hostile to non-Chinese fighters coming in training outside of Road UFC. What do you think about this claim? Yeah, I haven't heard that before, but that's about to change. Something with Road UFC. I guess I'm giving you a little bit of a preview here, but in the near future, you're going to have some Indian fighters and some Indonesian fighters training at the Shanghai PI. So if that's the case, then that is a culture that the leaders of the PI are going to want to get a hand on. Sometimes those things can happen in a training environment when there's people from different sides, people that have fought each other, maybe still have some beef. I don't know what is behind that, but that's about to change. Sumit Kumar is about to head there. I know both Gugun Guzman and Yudi Kayati, who are Indonesian fighters, either current or former champions with One Pride. They're going to the UFC Combine next week, and they're going to try out, and they're also trying out for a spot in Road UFC. So that was announced by One Pride Championship last weekend. But so yeah, there's going to be, and I think those are the only two Indonesians, and I'm not sure if I need to ask Sumit about this, if he's going to be a part of, if he's going to be like trying out for Road to UFC. I assume he's going to be part of the Combine. He told me he was headed to Shanghai in mid-March, which I think is next week, would make it showing up for the Combine so they can get all that data. But yeah, I think that you may start to see the UFC PI in Shanghai open up to some other fighters from other countries for sure. Besides Weili, who is the best MMA wrestler out of my homeland, China? Shiming. They are friends, and I've seen them both train together at Shanghai. Shiming is a very good wrestler for sure. Dong Huaxiang has a wrestling background, so I would say her. Probably those two, or those three. Yeah, Weili, Shiming, and Dong Huaxiang for sure. Ghost mentioned this on Sound and Pound, but why did they fire all the writers and remove all the antitrust stuff? From what I understand, so it's GRV Media is Bloody Elbow's new owner. From everything I can tell, they bought Bloody Elbow just for the Google ranking, and I mean, it like hurts me to say this, but it looks like they bought Bloody Elbow for the brand position, and they're just going to flood the site with a lot of the same kinds of easily produced MMA content, newsbeat kind of stuff that you see on a lot of other places. And they've just kind of bought it for the ranking. Some people have suggested, by looking at some of GRV Media's other stuff, that it could be AI produced, which is a huge bummer. But yeah, the writers, I mean, what it seems like GRV Media's strategy is have the smallest staff that you can, put out the content that is easiest to produce. I can't personally confirm this, but potentially, you know, if they go the AI article route, there's that. But I don't know if they're going to do that. But I mean, why would you keep on, if the ship was already sinking with the current model? I guess why would you like keep that ship going unless you felt like you could just make some, I don't know, back end or promotional kind of packaging changes to keep the same brand? But it sounds like they're just like, Bloody Elbow is a name that a lot of fans recognize, for better or for worse, and so we're just buying the Google ranking. Basically, all those writers probably too expensive to keep. I feel like probably Nate Wilcox was paying them as much as he could. I mean, he said that like he literally didn't have enough to pay everyone the most recent cycle, so he was basically forced to sell. So yeah, I just don't think, keeping on a couple of those guys maybe, but it just sounded like they have no interest in being that kind of media brand. They're just trying to basically say like, how can we keep our costs as low as they can and maximize our profits? So that's what I think happened. I think that's why they fired everyone. It was so weird how they were like, MMA fans recognize Bloody Elbow. It's one of the most like acclaimed like brands. So our first order of business is to burn it to the ground and keep none of that. It almost seemed like sarcastic in the way that they said it, or just so ironic how that was communicated. But yeah, there you have it. Heard anything about complete schedule of Road to UFC this year? Because One Pride posted that semi's going to fall in September and finals on December. Can you confirm that? I saw that too, and that's where I'm getting a lot of my info from. So if the schedule that One Pride posted is correct, then that would put Road to UFC opening round in Shanghai the weekend of May 17th. That's Friday through 19th. Usually they've done it over 2 days. I'm not sure if that is actually the truth, just because the UFC does have an event in Las Vegas that same day on the 18th. So it would make a little bit more sense for them to push it to the weekend past that. And then in September, I think, again, that was like September 15th was the day that fell on, which felt a little bit odd to me because September 16th is the UFC's Noche UFC show in the Sphere, UFC 303. So again, maybe it's going to be a week later. And then December, I think that was like December 8th or something, which would be almost the exact same date that they were planning to go to Shanghai this last year. That makes a little bit more sense. But that is the most that I know. I don't know if they have those dates locked in totally, although just sometimes that depends on how soon fighters can make a turnaround, right? But at the same time, the other side is that they try to plan those around Asian MMA events, whether they're in Abu Dhabi or Shanghai or Singapore. So the interesting thing with Abu Dhabi this year, this is just a random thought. You saw that the UFC announced that they're going back August 3rd for a fight night show. I'm more and more skeptical that the UFC is going to go back to Abu Dhabi in October for a pay-per-view, simply because that would put 2 Abu Dhabi shows in the span of 2 months, which is not impossible. I mean, they have a lot of fighters that they can fill out those cards with, but they're also going to Saudi Arabia in June. So that literally puts a Middle East show every other month. So I at least think it was the first year they had Road to UFC semis in Abu Dhabi in October. So my guess would be, if I were just to guess here, I would say Shanghai in May. Like, what would that be? Like May 25th, 24th. And then September, I would say expect Jakarta. And then maybe in December, Shanghai, or another Chinese event. Although I will say, I've heard some things about an Asian MMA event coming up sooner rather than later, sooner than September. So I'll see if I can find out more about that. That's all I'll say for now. Why is the UFC trying to build Sean O'Malley as a star? His metrics are pretty low on the embeddeds. Yeah, that's an interesting thing for sure. I think when things started out, Dana would always tout like the numbers for Sean O'Malley on his Contender Series fight, how they were like off the charts. And it seems like Sean O'Malley has a lot of the tools that you want in a star. Not all of them, but I think he does have some of the building blocks for a star. He's young. He is really active on social media and the internet. He has his own YouTube channel. He produces a lot of knockouts, exciting fights. But I think that for whatever reason, there may be like, I can't put my finger on it yet, but it feels like there's a likability that's missing, an endearment that is missing. And sometimes that likability is like a negative quality, where even if you set a lot of people off, you're still going to gain a lot of fans, the Sean Strickland effect, which I still don't put Sean Strickland as like a mega superstar just yet, but he's definitely grown. I mean, think about where he was a year ago. I mean, gosh, Sean Strickland was the guy that you called to make the 5-minute drive down to the Apex to headline your next Apex show. He was your middleweight main event at the Apex guy. And people would kind of roll their eyes, but think about how much his fortunes changed. Anyways, Sean O'Malley, I think that he could get there. I think he compared to other UFC champions, he's got a lot more wind behind his back. Thinking about Aljamain Sterling, who never really like clicked with like the broader fan base. I feel like Sean O'Malley has a leg up on him, simply because I think his fights are a lot more palatable. Knockouts. He has, I mean, he's aesthetically a very colorful guy, but personality wise hasn't always followed that, which I'm not saying that he has to. I mean, be yourself, do you, whatever you want to do. But, I feel like there is a likability and an endearment that is missing from Sean O'Malley. And maybe that'll just take time. Maybe that's something he can build. You honestly see this a lot. A lot of fighters, when they become a UFC champion, unless you're Ilia Topuria or Alex Pereira, like a lot of fighters, when they become a UFC champion, they're not big stars right away. I think the UFC saw a lot of those building blocks of a young guy. Maybe he can connect with a lot of Gen Z fans, exciting fights, good knockouts, things like that. And saw this long future, and that's why they put a lot of steam behind him. But I think that if Sean O'Malley really wants to break into that like mega star level, I mean, I wonder. I'm even afraid to say this. I wonder if if you're gonna translate Sean O'Malley into that mega star, if matchmaking needs to play a little bit into there. We see how sometimes the right fight can give fighters a certain shine. You've seen that with with, Nate Diaz and Michael Chandler, and Dustin Poirier, fighters that have fought Conor McGregor have taken some of that shine as well. Even Khabib got a lot bigger through his fight with McGregor. So I'm not suggesting they do like a champ versus champ fight right after this. I feel like the fight that has to happen after this for O'Malley, unless there's something controversial against Vera, is that he has to fight Merab. That has to be the fight next for him. But I don't know if that's the fight that's really going to like blow up his stardom, unless he decides to carry himself a little bit differently. But that's what I feel like is missing for O'Malley. Is it? And there's probably O'Malley fans out there. There obviously are. He is a bigger star than many UFC champions that have come before him. Make no mistake, especially at just his first title defense. But he has a lot of room. There's the runway is long for him, right? So. How old is Sean O'Malley? He's still a young guy. As far as I know, he's still in his 20s, right? So, yeah, I would say just give him time. And if he keeps winning, if he finds different ways to brand and market himself, then I think he'll get there. He's 29 years old, so he's right in his prime. He's got a long ways to go. But bantamweight, really hard division to stay champion for a long time. So, we'll see if he can keep the belt and continue to be in high profile fights. I think that eventually he'll get there if he keeps fighting in high profile fights. So Niza FC president has said that Nuragi should come to Kazakhstan at Dar team and train with Shavkat. What do you think about that? I think that's a great idea. He's at Unwall Fight right now, which, credit to those guys. They've cranked out so many high quality fighters, but I think that would be good for him. I think there have been some times where he's struggled with grappling in the past. Granted, he was a crazy young fighter fighting fighters way more experienced than him. But I think that could be a good idea. At least try it out. What's to hurt in trying it out? If it feels like a good fit, then keep it up. I like that idea, honestly. Any more information on Jared Brooks being fined his entire purse for the DQ? That's crazy. The info Brooks losing his purse came from Todd Atkins on Twitter. One would sell more tickets if they stopped announcing their fights. Okay, that's a different question. That is mind-blowing to me. You already lost your win money. You've already been fined for the yellow card, perhaps even more for the red card. You literally showed up just to show up. You didn't get paid anything. You did all the media obligations. You had trained, you cut weight. Your coaches did their part. You fought as much of the fight as it lasted. I feel like that deserves being paid at the very least. It feels like other cards that have been, or other fighters that have been disqualified for a red card. And I'd be curious, actually, I don't know for sure on this, but have they also been fined their entire purse as well? This seems really unfair, especially, there are different kinds of fouls and red cards, but like a red card for, basically pulling like a Peter Yan thing where you've got a guy clearly kneeling, you wait for a second, and then you just knee him in the head. Something really flagrant like that. I still don't think that should warrant a full foul, but like for Jared Brooks, like if he would have changed the angle slightly on that suplex, the fight would have just continued. It wouldn't have been a big deal. So I feel like that is unjust and annoying. And I don't have any more info on that. But that is really frustrating, right? For sure. One would sell more tickets if they stop announcing their fights like 3 weeks before the event and silently canceling fights 48 hours before the event. They do promote like their really big stuff. They announced that far in advance, like the 166 kind of stuff. I think they do, but their one Friday fight shows, you typically don't know about them unless they're like it's one of their big tentpole events. Like they have one coming up on April 5th. But otherwise, like they announce those fights like 5-6 days in advance. And I mean, that kind of frustrates me because it feels like fighters can't really like promote their fights coming up. Because I mean, I'll just sell it to you straight. When I was a manager, I managed a fighter that fought at One Friday Fights. So I saw the whole like timeline of when they're setting up the fight, verbal agreements, signing the contract. And it's like any other fight. It's not like these fights are coming together the week before. Usually, for us, like it came together probably 6 weeks before, if not more. I actually I don't totally remember, but it was a good ways, and it was enough for our guy to have a full training camp. But they didn't want us announcing the fight for whatever reason, which was annoying. And I don't know why they do that, but it at least for like the rhythm of like One Friday Fights, I think they're just kind of banking on like more of the brand and the time slot selling with its intense consistency every single Friday. Lumpini Stadium, same time, same place in Bangkok. More of the culture there is that on the weekends, people are just looking for a fight to go to. So it's not so much about who's fighting. It's more just about like, hey, it's a Friday night. Let's just go down and watch the fights. Or, hey, it's Friday. Let's turn on the TV and see who's fighting. Just like it's your favorite TV show back in the day, airing at the same time every week. That's what I feel like it is with the One Friday Fights thing. I still wouldn't mind. I mean, what's the harm in posting those fights on your website? I don't know. I don't know what their ticket sales are like for Lumpini. Sometimes it's so hard to see. Like, have you noticed how One Championship keeps things so dark in the arenas? I don't know if that's just to provide some contrast, a little bit of drama. If I think that's kind of cool, but like otherwise, like, yeah, it is really hard to see how many people are in there. Maybe that's if their ticket sales aren't doing great to kind of try to hide that. I don't know. But yeah, then the Stamp Fair text thing was weird. That fight was off, but it almost in or a reverse of what you said. Sometimes I feel like they will sell tickets based even off of fights that have long been canceled. And to be fair, the UFC, I feel like, does this too. They will have fights listed on ESPN or their website that have been already publicly off. Fighters have come out and said this fight is off. They'll still have the fight on the website. In fact, perfect example of that. It was weeks ago that the fight in the UFC on April 6th between Choi Sung-woo and Morgan Charrier was off. Morgan Charrier said that he was needing a new opponent weeks ago. Only like this afternoon, it was Alex Bahunin came out and announced that Chepe Mariscal was going to step in for Choi Sung-woo. But I checked even this week, and the Choi versus Charrier fight was still on the website. I know the UFC, they're not selling tickets to the Apex, so that's a little bit different. But either way, I feel like sometimes it's a little bit, I don't know if shady is the right word, but a little bit dishonest to be selling tickets for fights that you're still publicizing are on. So, we were promised 5 title fights for 166. We ended up getting 3. And I think that was almost like part of the branding for like part of the marketing for 166 was we've got 5 title fights. So having 2 of those fall off, they're a little bit slow to let us know. And even so, it was like the week before that we found out that Stamp versus Denise was off. By then, people have already made their travel arrangements. I don't know how many people are going to get refunds if they're really wanting to come for that fight. But yeah, very interesting. The crowd is the same with PFL in Saudi Arabia. It's the UFC brand for sure. Yeah, that's really the thing to watch, right? Like at this UFC Riyadh show, are we going to see a lot of different, I don't know what the word is, but like, are we going to see a lot of people that look like they're uber wealthy sitting on their phones? and kind of a dead vibe. Are they even going to sell out the show? I think a lot of that depends on the card that they put together. Obviously, if they were to do the card that we saw from the Apex last weekend, if that was going to take place in Saudi Arabia, I don't know if they sell that. I mean, did they sell that out? Probably not. But yeah, the UFC brand does have a lot of power. One is keeping Xiong on this shelf until she's rusty enough for Stamp to take her belt on one of the that is probably exactly what's going to happen. I would bet on that happening for sure. Very good point. Jean hasn't been able to make 115 in over a year. She needs to go to strawweight. In her fight against Jenilyn Olsen, she weighed in at 130 for an atomweight bout. Right. Another problem with only having one weight class. And the UFC has done this too with bantamweight and featherweight. And then for a while, they only had strawweight and bantamweight. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, you want to keep someone like Jin on your roster as much as you can because she's either a future contender for the belt, she's ranked number 5, or she's a good fighter for other fighters to fight and get experience. So you want her on there, but I would say you'd probably potentially discourage her from going up to strawweight, which is 125 for one championship. I don't know. I mean, what's the harm of having Jin go up and fight Xiong for the belt? I don't know. Don't know. Let me see. Ooh, a couple new folks on here. I like that. One should have, as I would say, a Western minor league like King of the Cage was for Pride back in the day. I think that is a great idea. I think that's a really good idea. I feel like if one championship wants to really, I think if profitability, I don't know, if I were running one championship, I would look at places like the US and I would look at Europe potentially too. Anywhere where I feel like I could make waves, and I would have a dedicated circuit there. Imagine what one championship could do in the US if they were like, hey, we're going to have like once a quarter, we're going to have 4-ounce Muay Thai fights in Colorado or Georgia. And it's going to be all American fighters. And we're just going to have a circuit on there. And the winners of, like a 8-man or 4-man tournament, they're going to get bigger contracts with one championship. That would be such a good idea. Do something to get buzz, because for me, where the money's at for one championship right now is their 4-ounce Muay Thai. That is what sets them apart from everyone else the most. And that is a really exciting brand. And I think an exciting sport. And I think that is what they should really build things around. And they're looking to build in Europe. Europe is on fire, at least with MMA right now. Europe is on fire. And we saw that again with PFL Paris, KSW, Octagon, lots of great things going on in Europe right now. But I think, yeah, if you could have a Europe version of that, and you could have a US version of that. Sign the fighters to pretty like small contracts, 1-fight deals, and have, small arenas. How cool would that be? Get like a 1,000 seat theater and do some 4-ounce Muay Thai fights in Denver or Atlanta. Super cool. Love that idea. Could I please talk about Tai Lakanuaraji from Road to UFC? As I heard, he does not have a stable team behind him, but I think this kid is extremely talented. Yeah, so this kind of connects to asking about if he should go to Dar team. He does have Unboil Fight. So I've talked about them a lot. Another gym that I would love to go visit later this year, but they have a really big gym in Sichuan in Chengdu, China. A lot of great fighters have come out of there, and overall, I think it's a pretty good team. But I think if you're really wanting to like keep growing into the elite level, you may want to look at some other places. So that's how I feel about Tai Laka. Could he permanently hang out at the UFC PI? Potentially. He's trained there a lot already. Recently, I've seen him more at Will Fight. So I've follow him a little bit on his Douyin account. But yeah, he's been back there. But yeah, I mean, I would also imagine there's probably a lot of management companies that are looking to sign him as well. He seems like the guy to sign in China right now for sure, because with him, you get the Chinese, you get China, and you get Kazakhstan behind him. I think he has a pretty good following in Kazakhstan. Actually, let me check to see what he is at on his Instagram. The thing is that, so this kid does not post. He started posting more and more actually to Instagram, which is great. But for a while, he wasn't posting like anything. Like even now, the guy probably has like 15 posts on Instagram, and almost all of them, even going back to like his first post on Instagram was December 8th. I know Instagram isn't really big in China, but it's bigger in Kazakhstan for sure. So probably most of those followers are Kazakh followers, but he could be a really big star. Exciting guy, kind of connections to two countries for sure. So why do I think minorities in China are overrepresented in Chinese MMA? For example, I think there are maybe 2 million Kazakhs in China, but they're like half the Chinese MMA scene. I know Tibetans and Mongolians, Kazakhs, fighters. There's a lot of other ethnic minorities. I think it goes back to the martial arts background for them. And, that's something I'd have to think more about, because there is a strong martial arts background in a lot of fighters in China with Sanda, which is honestly a very easily adapted martial art for MMA. But I don't know. It seems like a lot of those fighters have really good wrestling backgrounds that come from some of the ethnic minorities. And so I don't know if that's part of it. And maybe they're like, Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of these things, slightly unrelated, but related. I hear some people ask me, why are in women's MMA, why are all the fighters between like atom weight and bantamweight, why are there not a lot of like tall women that you would normally see in like volleyball or basketball or softball? Why are there not bigger weight classes? And I think my answer to that would be, well, there are already pathways carved out for these girls. As kids, they get involved with soccer or softball or basketball. And from there, they follow that path to its completion, which usually ends in high school. For some, it ends in college. And a very small few of them will go on to play professionally. But by then, it's like the time to get into MMA is already passed. So I think for people whose physical attributes fit other more established sports, that's why you don't see them in MMA. And I wonder for China if there are some of those pre-established pathways, especially for like Sanda fighters, where if you get into Sanda at a young age, you already have this whole like stream and pathway set out for you of competing at this and that, and then I don't know, getting into kickboxing, things like that. I'm merely speculating here. Already in my mind, I hear a couple different areas for pushback, but that might be why you don't see just like swaths and swaths and swaths of Sanda fighters running over to MMA. And you do see some, but I don't know if it's something with these minorities being involved with wrestling, where there's a closer link with wrestling and MMA. I'm not totally sure. It's really interesting. That would be something, as I think about getting time with some of these minority fighters, and I have like some pretty concrete plans to do some interviews throughout the year with some of them. I think that'd be a really interesting question to ask, especially, I feel like it could be different for different minorities. You could get some different answers for that, for sure. For sure. Let's see. August can't be Jakarta for Indonesia Arena because it's fully booked. Yeah, the time frame for Road to UFC would be September 21st, is what you said, and that lines up perfectly for the Road to UFC semis. Exactly, right on the date. Abu Dhabi in August kind of counts as an Asian show. Yeah, I don't feel like they're going to do Road to UFC at that. I'm all for UFC developing potential markets, but I think it'd be much easier to grow the UFC brand with established scenes like Korea, Japan. Yes and no. Korea, a little bit more. Japan, I think, is more challenging because, first of all, you've already got Ryzen there, who I think dominates a lot of that scene. But Japan, like all these countries are different because Japan has had ebbs and flows, right? I think that we could be in a time where it's rising a little bit. It seems like we're hitting a wave of a lot of really young, really exciting Japanese fighters. So maybe that'll change, but like it all depends. Well, first of all, on TV deals, depends on the fighters that are available. It depends on arenas, which they've already done shows in both South Korea and Japan. But just certain little things just endear a country towards MMA in different ways. Has a lot to do with the stars. Like if Korea had a star that they were just pumped to rally around, they had a Cedric Doumbé. Obviously, everyone says Conor McGregor, but that's kind of 1 in a million. But if there was someone like that could just ignite the fan base, I think that they could do that. Like even for Korean Zombie, I feel like they probably could have sold out the arena for just off of Korean Zombie, maybe. But yeah, I think Japan, it comes and goes. There's with Pride, is like they had this big thing in Japan, and then it all came crashing down. It seemed like there was burnout, there was a distancing from MMA, and just the culture kind of shifted away from a little bit. And Ryzen has, I would say, been the most powerful effort to try to revive that. So we could see it come back. Korea, I think, is growing there as well. Ultimately, I think in their perfect world, it's like if we can get China on board, then that's like the literal like biggest country that we could create an MMA market for. So I understand why they're putting a lot of effort into there. But Road to UFC, they are trying to develop Chinese or Korean and Japanese stars, and I feel like they did try to go back to Korea this last year, fell through. Don't think we'll probably get that this year, especially with Korean Zombie retiring, but you never know. Maybe they'll just try and cobble together some international fighters, some Asian fighters, and do a soul card in 2025. Not sure. I know we can focus on MMA here, but did you see the Big Bang Jung Jalei versus Joseph Parker? I will definitely try to catch that fight tomorrow. I don't really focus on other combat sports here, and I don't even personally follow them a whole lot. But I'm definitely going to try to catch the Ngannou Joshua fight tomorrow. So I would love to try to catch that fight as well. Let's see. I've got to duck out actually, so I am gonna have to cut things off. Appreciate all the other questions I couldn't get to. But man, we've already gone an hour and 40 minutes. That has to feel like a record. So really appreciate that. Saw a lot of new faces on there, and look forward to seeing you next week as well. But gonna have to cut things off. But Anyways, enjoy UFC 299, this card that has kind of snuck up on all of us as we've been all buzzing about UFC 300. I'm absolutely pumped for UFC 299, still thinking through how I want to watch it, my plans for that, but totally stacked top to bottom. Enjoy that. Follow MMA Ecosystem on all your social media platforms. Check the website for updates and results, and we'll see you next week.